So now that the winter sowing part of my gardening process has sort of come to a wrap for the first year, I thought I'd give you some of my top 10 takeaways from what I learned from the process. And I'd like to start off by saying that, first of all, I think, I'm in Maryland in Zone 7A, and so what applies to me may not necessarily be perfect for you if you're not in this area, and also with the changing weather conditions because of climate change and other things, this process will change over time, and I'm aware of that. But here's my lessons learned, or observations, I guess you could say. First of all, I want to start off with how surprised I was at how well winter sowing worked. I tried it thinking it made sense, knowing I didn't have the space inside the house or the lighting capacity to really, without making some major investments, to really give my seedlings enough sun, and it just worked wonderful. I might have overplanted. Not might is an understatement. I overplanted by eons. I have a very small backyard with very little sun and a very small front yard, and I just did the tally of how many seedlings I have grown from the winter sowing jugs, about 3/4 of which I'm going to give away or have given away. I counted up 153 seedlings that I grew this winter, not counting like the herbs and flowers. This is just the vegetables, the peas, the squash, the tomatoes. So I might have overdone it, but that leads me to my second lesson learned, and not so much a lesson learned, but sort of a verification, which is that trust the process. Go online, look at the different forums, see what they suggest. It's not all intuitive. Some of it is counterintuitive, like leaving the caps off, not sowing your seeds too deep, doing a thin layer of soil on top, making sure they have enough water, covering them when it's cold outside and they've grown, which actually was my third tip, which is to cover your plants. When they're in the seedling stage, they're totally fine. They can handle all kinds of temperatures, the freezing, whatever. But once they start germinating and growing, then they need a little bit of protection. So you need like a heavy blanket or something like that over the jugs. I also tend to put, since I have a cellar, I put my seedlings in the cellar or in the shed. And I even did that sometimes when it rained too much, because I learned that if it rains too much, the seedlings can get really damp because they'll touch the side of the jugs, and it's just not really conducive to them growing healthy. So, all right, I think we're up to number 4, which is, so really, when you have fresh seeds, this is particularly for ones that you bought the seeds for this year, or maybe even last year, because I had some that I got through seed exchange from last year that grew well. So 1 seed per spot in the jugs. The germination rate was so high that I had, sometimes I'd put 3 seeds in a hole, and I had 3 growing up. And of course you can separate them, but it's just such a hassle and it's harder on the plants. So what I did for my second round of jugs, which worked much better, was I only did, for the bigger plants like zucchini and tomatoes, things that take up a lot of space in the jug, I did 1 per spot, and then I did a second one just a couple of inches away. And that way, if both, you have sort of a guarantee that one will germinate, but by doing that, you're not going to have to fight to separate them. All right, number 5 lesson for me was, while the winter sowing process in theory should be fine to plant all of your plants at once, put them out in the snow, if you have a really mild winter and mild spring, but then crazy like spring frosts like we had, you're going to get really frustrated because your warm weather veggies really will be outgrowing their jugs and will be having the damp issues I talked about touching the side of the pot. So I think this next year I'm going to try to plant only the cool weather veggies like in March, February and March, And then I'm going to wait until April, like early to mid-April, to plant my summer veggies. And another exception to that though, is I realized that the pepper seedlings take quite a long time to actually grow, and so I will probably sow my pepper seedlings at the same time as my cool weather veggies. And cool weather veggies are like kale, peas, arugula, things that you're going to transplant before the final frost, when it's still snowing or chilly outside. I think I'm on number 6. Squash, zucchini, cucumbers, and tomatoes outgrow their jugs fast. And that's another reason why you don't want to put the soil too high, and you also want to watch them closely, and again, not plant them too early. Yeah. Number 7 is be realistic about what you have space for and only plant a little more than needed. As I said, I got 150 plus seedlings, and I have a very small backyard and very small front yard. And yesterday I was feeling sort of down about gardening, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized that part of it is probably that I had all these seedlings and now I'm not able to plant all of them. Yes, I'm able to give it away. And once I realized that, I was depressed because like all of that work is not going into my soil. While I love giving away and it is super rewarding to give away seedlings, the gardening joy is really for me in having plants grow and getting vegetables out of them. And so I just, I think next year I'm going to be a little more conservative. I mean, to be honest, part of the reason why I grew so many for the second set of jugs I grew was because I wanted to make sure to be able to give away seedlings. So because of the coronavirus crisis. And so once I remembered that also, it really helped. It's like, okay, this was on purpose. It's okay that I grew all these seedlings and they will go to good homes. It will be okay. Number 8 is label, label, label. So I was fortunate to have watched the videos from the Winter Sowing group with Cheryl Mann, and she did a great job explaining that you need to label both the inside and the outside of the jug. And I used the paint pens, and they did fade, but I could still read them. I found they actually faded less if I wrote on the duct tape that I put around the jugs, and that also makes it easier to use the jugs the second year. So the labeling for the inside and outside was fine, but back to that growing too many seedlings thing, when it came to pot up the seedlings, either because they were outgrowing the jugs and it wasn't quite time to put them in the soil, it wasn't quite warm enough yet, or because I was going to give some away, I didn't quite have the process set up right for making sure I labeled the containers I was going to put them in. Before I drilled the holes or whatever, I counted up how many seedlings I needed to put in those containers. I hadn't done any of those steps. I kind of just rushed because I didn't want the seedlings to be out of soil and like their roots exposed for very long to the air. And as a result, I ended up with about 6 plants, 4 tomato plants and 2 squash plants that I'm really not sure what they are. I know for the tomatoes, they're either zebra or Cherokee because those are the 2 kinds I grew. But for the squash, I grew like 6 kinds, and I'm going to offer them up and see if anybody wants to take a chance, and if not, I might try growing them, but it's possible that those 6 seedlings will go to waste because I didn't label them. So just have a process for label, don't rush, make sure you label both the inside and the outside of the jug, as well as where you put it in the garden, and if you put it in any containers that you're going to give away, that you know what you're going to be giving away. Number 9. Which relates to when you're potting up your seedlings, if you can't put them straight in the ground. Solo cups are your friend. I really didn't have the money or time to go out and buy a whole bunch of little seed containers. You know, the little seedling pots you get your seedlings in when you go to Home Depot or your local nursery. I had a good number of those, but when it came to having 153, it was probably like 110 I'm giving away. I just didn't have that many. So I saw Cheryl Mann and some others had been using solo cups. So I went to the store and I bought a huge pack of them. And it was, you know, $5, a cheap alternative. While I'm not a huge fan of using plastic, if the plants are only in there for a short amount of time and you also know they're food safe, it's probably not that horrible of a deal. And in some ways, I found that by giving the plants some time in a container of their own before I transplanted them, the roots were much more resolved, especially since I had to break them apart so much and a lot of them lost a lot of root by me separating them, that having them in the containers actually really, in solo cups actually helped. But make sure you put holes in your containers, which actually I might have 11 for this one. Or maybe I will make this number 10. Remember to put holes, drill holes in your jugs, drill them on the bottom and the side, and make sure if you're potting things up that there's a way for them to drain. If you recall, if you're one of my Facebook friends, you will remember that I had a huge container of cucumbers that I was so proud of, and then they were starting to, when I watered them, they were starting to puddle and the water wasn't going down, and I was like, what's going on? And the container didn't have holes in the bottom of it. Most of the ones I had bought had, but this one was like a cheap one that I had left over that I hadn't used last year. And so I had to go and get my Dremel tool and drill emergency holes in it, tipping it sideways with the container. I had already put the trellis up and everything. It just was a hot mess. So not rushing and taking all the right steps is good. I hope you enjoyed this list, that it was some use to you, and I really just want to overall encourage you to try the process if you haven't yet. It might not be the best process if you're going to have your jugs in a place where neighbors are going to see it all the time because they're not really beautiful, but if you have a backyard or like an area where you can put the pots out, and you're not in like a HOA where neighbors are going to complain, it's just, the process is so hassle-free and really fun to watch them grow and to not have to worry too much until like the end stage about what you're going to do with them. And for me, for someone who was so new at this process, it was really a relief to not have to worry about, okay, I have to harden them for 2 weeks. When you do harden these seedlings, I will mention, you do want to open the containers at the end. So maybe this is your bonus number 11. You do, once the seedlings have got their first set of true leaves, that's not the first set that come up, but the leaves that actually look like the plant leaves will look in the end. So once you have those true leaves coming out, you can open the jugs. You can wait till they get full height, but I found for the cool weather vegetables, planting them earlier when they were younger was better because they just worked better in the soil. When you open the jugs, you're going to leave them in the container potentially for a day or two. The first one just not in the sun necessarily, or maybe on a shady day, and the second one in the sun. Now, for some plants, I planted them immediately, and they did just fine. But I did find the ones that I left in the jug for at least a day before I transplanted them open. You know, I opened the bottom half of the jug, the top half of the jug. They just did better in general. So, as I was saying, I want to encourage you to try that process. If you had failure this year, you're going to fail. I'm expecting more failures this year because I'm still a new gardener. But let me know what you think. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I also recommend you check out Facebook groups. There's 2 winter sowing groups, one with Cheryl Mann and another one that's just general winter sowing. They're both super useful to me. And also, I just want to put a quick plug in. This is the final in my winter sowing series, so I'm going to have a link here at the end for you to be able to watch some of the highlights of how I went about the process, how my excitement at seedlings coming out and things like that. So check it out. Tell me what you think. If you liked this video, if you found it helpful, tell me what your observations have been growing seedlings indoors or outdoors. If you think this process would be good for you, or if you've had success, share with me what you've had particular success or challenges with. I did find I had trouble with a few types of plants, and maybe I'll talk about that in another video. But generally, I was pretty happy. So please like or subscribe, and I'll see you next time.